In 1940, continental Europe had surrendered to the relentless advance of the swastika. France, once proud and free, now marched under German orders. Poland had fallen within weeks. Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, one by one, nations were swallowed up by the brutal machinery of the Reich, and then only one remained. Britain, alone, surrounded, the last stronghold between freedom and total darkness. Over its green fields and historic cities, a heavy silence hum, a silence that brought no peace. It was a harbinger of terror, often broken not by the song of birds, but by the mournful wail of air raid sirens. But amid the fear, a new sound emerged, high-pitched, metallic, cutting. It was not just the roar of an engine, it was a cry of resistance. It was the sound of a promise made in heaven. Amid the gray clouds and the shrapnel of war, a silhouette sped past. Elliptical wings, elegant fuselage, unmistakable presence. This was no ordinary fighter aircraft. This was a masterpiece of British engineering, forged with urgency, precision, and purpose. This plane did not just carry ammunition. It carried the weight of a cornered nation, the courage of its pilots, and the last spark of hope for a free Europe. It was more than steel and gunpowder. It was resistance in machine form. It was the Supermarine Spitfire. The situation was desperate. The German Blitzkrieg had swept across Europe with terrifying speed and brutality. The mighty Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring's Air Force, boasted a reputation for invincibility. With thousands of Dornier, Heinkel, and Junkers bombers, escorted by fearsome Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. The German plan, Operation Sea Lion, was clear. Annihilate the Royal Air Force, the RAF, gain total air superiority over the English Channel and southern England, and then launch a massive amphibious invasion. In Britain, the newly installed Prime Minister Winston Churchill, with his fiery rhetoric and unwavering resolve, was trying to prepare his people for the unimaginable. In a speech that would echo throughout history, he warned of the coming battle, declaring that the survival of Christian civilization and the continuity of British institutions depended on it. And it was in this context that he uttered the immortal words about the RAF pilots. Never in the field of human conflict were so many owed so much to so few. They were indeed few, young, often inexperienced pilots with fewer aircraft, but they possessed a fighting spirit that the enemy, in its arrogance, fatally underestimated. The British response to this gigantic threat did not emerge overnight. It began to take shape years earlier on the drawing boards and in the workshops of Supermarine Aviation Works. There, a brilliant and visionary engineer, Reginald J. Mitchell, obsessed with speed and aeronautics since childhood, dreamed of a combat aircraft that would be an extension of the pilot's will. Mitchell had already made a name for himself with his Schneider trophy-winning flying boats, speed record-breaking aircraft that were crucial to the development of powerful engines and advanced aerodynamics. He did not want to build just another sturdy biplane fighter like many of his time. He envisioned a machine that would redefine aerial combat. The Spitfire, whose name is said to have been suggested by Sir Robert McLean, the director of Vickers Armstrong's, Supermarine's parent company, who found his daughter a little fire spitter, was born out of this obsession with speed, agility, and lethal elegance. Its design was revolutionary, a lightweight metal monocoque fuselage, retractable landing gear, and most distinctively, its elliptical wings. This shape was no mere aesthetic whim. Elliptical wings provided optimum lift with minimal drag, allowing tighter turns and higher speeds. At the heart of this machine was the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, a water-cooled V12 that would continually evolve throughout the war, becoming a legend in its own right. Tragically, R.J. Mitchell would not live to see the full impact of his creation. He succumbed to cancer in 1937 at the age of 42, but his legacy, the Spitfire, was ready to rise to the challenge. More than a technological innovation, it was the embodiment of British ingenuity, a declaration that even in the face of numerically superior enemy, intelligence and preparation could turn the tide. When the skies over Britain became the main theater of war in the summer of 1940, the Spitfire was put to the test. Dogfights, close and aerial combat, became a daily occurrence, brutal encounters that required superhuman skill, courage, and nerves of steel. On one side were the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf 109s, especially the Emil model. These were formidable aircraft with heavy cannon armament and a direct fuel injection engine that allowed them to maneuver in negative gravity without losing power, an initial advantage over the carbureted Merlin engines. On the other side were the Spitfires. Although initially outnumbered by the Hawker Hurricanes, the RAFs are the mainstay, a more robust and stable firing platform. Crucial against the bombers, the Spitfires, with their superior grace and agility, were the ideal fighters to face the Bf 109s. The encounters were like a deadly chase. Every dive, every turn, every burst of machine gun fire was a gamble between life and death. The initially confident German pilots soon learned to respect and fear the Spitfire's aggressive personality. The skies over England were no longer the exclusive domain of the Luftwaffe. Britain, with the Spitfire in the vanguard, was beginning to fight back with ferocity. But technology, however advanced, does not win wars on its own. The rail fuel for the Spitfire came from those who flew it and the system that supported them. The RAF pilots were mostly young men in their 20s. Many were British, but they were joined by volunteers from across the British Empire, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans, and crucially, exiled pilots from previously occupied nations. Poles, Czechs, French, Belgians, all with a burning thirst for revenge and a desperate desire to liberate their homelands. Despite their youth and, for many, their lack of previous combat experience, day after day they took to the skies, often several times a day, to intercept the waves of bombers that threatened their homes, their families, their freedom. The British strategy, orchestrated by Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, commander of RAF Fighter Command, was also decisive. It was not just a matter of getting fighters into the air. The Dowding system was an integrated defense network comprising the newly developed chain home radar stations, which provided vital warning of approaching enemy formations. The Observer Corps, volunteers who visually tracked the aircraft, and sector control rooms where information was processed in squadrons were precisely directed to intercept the enemy. This defensive approach, fighting over their own territory, allowed British pilots to remain in the air longer. Damaged aircraft could sometimes be recovered and repaired, and downed pilots could recover and return combat quickly. It was a vital economy of manpower, wearing down the enemy operating far from their bases. The climax of the Battle of Britain was approaching. The Luftwaffe, frustrated by the RAF's stubborn resistance, intensified its attacks. And then came September 15, 1940. This day will become known as Battle of Britain Day. German intelligence mistakenly believed that the RAF was on the verge of collapse. Its last reserves committed. Göring ordered a massive attack, an attempt to deliver the final blow. Hundreds of bombers, escorted by even greater numbers of fighters, crossed the English Channel in two main waves, targeting London and other strategic targets. It was all or nothing. If the Luftwaffe prevailed that day, air superiority would be German. An invasion of Britain would be all but inevitable. If the RAF managed to repel the attack, Hitler would be forced to reconsider his plans. For hours, the skies over southern England were an open inferno, with smoke from downed planes, the roar of engines, and the fire of machine guns and cannon. The Spitfires, side by side with the equally heroic Hawker Hurricanes, which often concentrated on the bombers, while the Spitfires, engaged as escorting fighters, fought with overwhelming fury, pilot against pilot, machine against machine. By the end of that grueling day, the outcome was clear. The Luftwaffe had suffered unsustainable losses, far greater than those of the RAF. The skies over Britain were defended. The large-scale Nazi air offensive was broken. 2 days later, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The invasion of England had failed. The impact of the Spitfire and the men who flew it cannot be measured in the numbers of enemy aircraft shot down alone. It saved far more than military targets. It saved cities from complete annihilation. It saved countless civilian lives. Most crucially, it saved the morale of a people who refused to be subjugated. The Spitfire became the embodiment of British resistance, a beacon of hope not just for Britain, but for all free nations fighting tyranny. It demonstrated that Nazi might was not invincible. It bought precious time for the Allied forces to regroup and eventually take the fight back to the continent. In British culture, the Spitfire has risen to iconic status, a hero of aluminium and steel, a poignant reminder that even in the darkest hours, when all seems lost, courage, innovation, and determination can prevail. Decades have passed since those tumultuous days. World War II is now a distant memory for many, a chapter in the history books. But the Spitfire's legacy still soars. Preserved in museums around the world, meticulously restored by enthusiasts, revered at ceremonies and air shows where the unmistakable sound of its Merlin engine still sends shivers down the spine. Veteran pilots, those few who are still with us, speak of it with a twinkle in their eyes, a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Younger generations look up to it with admiration, a timeless symbol of bravery and engineering excellence. More than a war machine, the Spitfire represents a powerful idea that freedom is a precious commodity, one that demands vigilance, sacrifice, and at times, a commitment to fight to the end. It is proof that sometimes, in an aircraft in the hands of a young pilot, lies the destiny of a nation. Have you ever imagined that the course of history, the fate of millions, could depend on the agility and power of a single plane and the courage of the men who piloted it? The story of the Spitfire is one of those incredible tales where the line between victory and annihilation was as thin as a razor's edge. But how many other stories of bravery, of decisive innovation, of pivotal moments that define our world, lie in the shadows waiting to be told? If this journey into the skies of the Battle of Britain has piqued your curiosity, just imagine what else history has to reveal. Subscribe to the channel, dive with us into these fascinating episodes, and discover the events and characters that will almost be revealed.